Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today's video is my last video of 2022 and I wanted to save one of my favorite videos for last. And sometimes I film this differently. For the past few years, I've been ranking all of the palettes that I've tried, but I wanted to do something a little bit different this year and just share my top palettes of 2022. When I sat down to plan this video and I was making a list of all of the palettes I've tried, I realized there were so many good palettes that weren't necessarily standouts or great palettes. They were kind of forgettable. So instead of just throwing them all in a ranking and just sharing like arbitrary numbers, because really they all perform very similarly, I wanted to take out the highest performing palettes, the ones that I love the most, the ones that I consistently reach for, and really highlight those. There were only a couple of palettes that I would really consider to be bad palettes, which I did share in my worst makeup of 2022 video, but for the most part, all of the palettes that I tried were good, and I feel like that's a theme that we tend to see with makeup these days. So many products are really good, but they're not necessarily great or standouts, and I really wanted to bring attention to the best palettes I tried in 2022. But first, I just want to say thank you so much for watching my videos this year. This is my last video of the year, and I love YouTube so much, and I feel like I appreciated YouTube this year more than ever because I did kind of move a little bit more into Instagram and TikTok and short form content because that is what we're seeing these days, and I do love filming short form content. I think it's really fun, and it just kind of helps me condense my thoughts and be a little bit more creative. But in doing that and really expanding my community on Instagram and TikTok, I've realized there's just nothing like YouTube. I love Instagram, I love TikTok, but my YouTube community is so different. I feel like I have a really good relationship with you. A lot of you guys have been here for years and years. Some of you are new, but it just means so much that you would take the time to watch my videos. There's so much content on YouTube, so many amazing channels. So the fact that you take time out of your day to sit here and watch one of my videos or just listen to one of my videos really means so much to me. And I read all of your comments, I chat with you guys, I recognize your names, and I feel like I know personal facts about you, and it's just such a different space here. So I'm so thankful for YouTube. I'm excited for 2023, and I just want to say thank you for being here during the past year. So I will be back in about a week. I'm just taking a week off to spend time with family. If you guys are celebrating the holiday season this year, I hope you're having an amazing holiday season. If not, I hope December is going really well for you, and I'm excited to jump back into it in 2023 and share some new videos with you. But let's jump into it, and we'll end the video, or we'll end the year sharing my favorite palettes of the year. So I am going to save my top 3 palettes for the end of the video and rank those, like third place, second place, and then first place, because I feel like there are standout palettes that fit into those categories for me. But everything else I'm just going to share in no particular order. So everything in today's video did launch in 2022, with the exception of these first 2 palettes, but I had to mention them. So I picked these up at the beginning of the year because you guys had recommended these to me over and over in 2022, and I finally decided to try them. In fact, I feel like I picked this one up first, and because it was so good, I ended up grabbing the other one. So I had to share them in today's video. I know I've talked about them a lot this year, but for good reason. So the first one is the Flower Beauty Desert Lights palette. I've always been such a shimmer eyeshadow fan, but especially over the past year or two, I feel like I've really appreciated a really gorgeous, intense, rich shimmer, and that's what you get in this palette. There are 6 beautiful shades. These are true, intense, foiled metallic shadows, and I feel like whenever I'm doing an eyeshadow look and it just needs something extra, like an extra pop, this is always what I reach for. These look like intense liquid metal on the eyes. They're so stunning. In fact, I don't know that there's another metallic formula that I've tried that's quite as intense as these. I would say something that comes close would be the ColourPop Super Shock shadows, but these are not quite the same texture. Like, those are a true cream to powder texture. These are powder, but they're like almost like wet foiled powder, if that makes sense. And then this one is the Jungle Lights palette. Again, whenever I want to intensify my look, I always reach for one of these. I don't typically get a full look using these because I do usually like to incorporate matte shadows into my eyeshadow looks, but I feel like these are so nice to have on hand because they just go with other palettes in my collection, and they add that much needed, like, really beautiful, glowy, shiny, rich metallic vibe that sometimes other palettes are lacking. Natasha Denona launched some really beautiful palettes this year, some really pretty colorful palettes, some great neutral palettes. One of my favorites was the Mini Bronze. I was really excited about this one when I first saw that she was coming out with it because the mid-size bronze palette is one of my top palettes of all time. I think it was my favorite palette of I want to say 2020, whatever year that launched, it was my #1 palette and it's still one of my favorites. I go back and forth between that one and Natasha Denona Retro. Like those are my top 2 palettes of all time. Anyway, I was really excited about this one because it's a really good complementary palette to the mid-size bronze palette. It's interesting because sometimes with her mini palettes, you get a very similar color story. Like I feel like the mini Love is pretty similar to the mid-sized Love, and the mini bronze has a similar color story, but it's different. The mid-sized bronze has mainly shimmer shadows, which I love. This one is a mainly matte palette with just one shimmer. So I feel like these matte shadows work so well in combination with the mid-sized bronze palette, but it's also great on its own. So I love this one. I need to do like an updated video sharing a ranking or all of my thoughts on the Natasha Denona palettes I have, but I think this past year I used my mini palettes more than my mid-size palettes. I feel like they're super simple. There's only 5 shades, so it just makes things quick and easy. Another great like neutral bronzy palette that I tried this year is from LA Girl. So I have a few LA Girl eyeshadow palettes in my collection, but the majority of them are really vibrant, very colorful. So I wanted to try something a little bit more toned down and neutral, so I picked this one up. It is the Sunkissed Glow palette. By the way, I do have videos using the majority of these palettes. I've done like 2 looks 1 palette or review videos or get ready with me's. So I'll link any related videos in the description box, but I'll try to include some clips of me wearing the palettes so you can see what they look like on the eyes as I'm talking about them. I feel like that will be maybe a little bit more helpful so you can see some of the different looks I've created. That might take me a little while, but because I narrowed it down to my top palettes, I feel like I can do that for today's video. Anyway, I was excited to pick this one up and I love it. I think it has so many gorgeous staple shadows in here. So obviously you get your top 2 rows of shimmers, your bottom 2 rows of mattes. LA Girl's formula is very, very easy to work with. So it's a great beginner formula, or it's really nice if you don't necessarily want anything too intense on the eyes. The matte shadows are buildable. Like you definitely get some lighter, softer shades, but if you reach into the darker shades, you can do something more dramatic too. And then the shimmers are really pretty, just very soft and reflective on the eyes. But again, if you go in with some of these darker shades, you'll get a more intense look. Now, if you are looking for a little bit more of an intense, rich palette, you are going to love the Huda Beauty Empowered palette. So I haven't had this one for quite as long as I've had the other palettes. I just picked this one up during the last Sephora VIB sale, but I've used it a lot since then, and whenever I wear this palette in a video, I feel like I get so many compliments on my eyeshadow looks because it really is just such a gorgeous palette, and I feel like there's so much you can do with this. I feel like if I would have had more time with this, it might have made its way up in my ranking, like into my top 3, because the quality really is good. You get a lot of staple, very smooth, blendable matte shadows in here. So sometimes if I'm in a hurry, I'll just take one of these shadows and then take like a really light, soft shimmer from another palette or like my ColourPop Super Shock shadows and blend it all over the lid. But when I want a really intense, rich, vibrant, really beautiful, sultry look, I love this palette. The foiled metallics in here are so stunning, incredibly vibrant on the eyes. There are a couple of cream shadows in here, and I feel like that's more of a trend that we see in palettes these days, and I don't usually prefer them. I feel like I can get use out of them, and they do kind of work as a nice base before you go in with a shimmer, but I feel like I also would have maybe ranked it a little bit higher if it just had like regular mattes and shimmers in here, because as nice as they are, like they do perform well, they're just not my preferred eyeshadow formula. But Huda Beauty eyeshadow palettes are some of my favorites. A lot of you guys asked me if I like this one better or Naughty Nude, and I feel like it's hard to decide. I think I get more use out of Naughty Nude because that one is more of like a mid-toned, neutral, very brown eyeshadow palette, so I feel like I can create a ton of looks using it, whereas with this one, when I do reach for it, I do tend to get something a little bit more dramatic, which isn't always what I go for day to day. But when I wear this one, I feel like I'm just so happy with my look every time, and it's just fun to play with. I feel like that's what her palettes do for me because I just like to have fun with eyeshadow, and I feel like for a little while I was kind of losing that. Like I would just throw it on to throw it on, but when I use the Huda Beauty palette like this one or Mercury Retrograde, it just puts me in such a good mood, and the quality is definitely there, so I wanted to mention this one. Another palette that just puts me in such a good mood when I use it is this one. It is the palette that was a collab between Heather Austin and Adept Cosmetics. It comes with the most stunning shadows. This is just such a gorgeous, stunning palette. I have so much fun using this one, and I feel like that's what makeup is is all about for me these days. I just wanted to put me in a good mood. I want to have a fun time like sitting down and doing my makeup, but also when I catch like a glimpse of myself in the mirror, I just wanted to boost my mood again, and I feel like that's what this does for me. The matte shadows are very vibrant and super intense. The shimmers in here are amazing. One of my favorite looks is to use this one in like the outer corner and the crease, this all over the lid, and then I'll take a little bit of this shade, and it's just so gorgeous. The quality of this palette is great. The color story is so stunning. Like Heather definitely did such a gorgeous job with this palette, and I love it. I think she launched this in, I want to say like March or April, and I've really enjoyed it so many times since then. So I wanted to share this one in today's video too. There were two ColourPop palettes I wanted to mention in today's video. ColourPop launched a million palettes this year, as they always do, and there were a lot of really good palettes. Like whenever I tried a ColourPop palette this year, I thought it was great. There were a couple that I felt like weren't necessarily their best, but overall I thought they were really good as a whole. But there were two kind of standout palettes that I wanted to share in today's video. So the first one is this one. I loved this palette so much during the summertime. It's called In the Springs, and I feel like this is something that maybe would have been popular like a few years ago when everyone was doing like pops of blues in their palettes, or they were doing like warm toned neutrals with pops of blue, but I felt like this was more of a modern take on that. I just really like this color story because it's very vibrant, very intense, really fun, and for the most part, a lot of the eyeshadows that I wore this year were more on the toned down side. Even if they were colorful, it was like a softer colorful look. So I had so much fun using this because I was able to create a ton of really vibrant eyeshadow looks, and I was doing a lot of like blue on my lower lash line, and again, it was just a really fun palette to have in my collection. But on top of that, the quality was really good. I felt like this was one of their best palettes in terms of quality. The matte shadows were very rich and intense. The shimmer shadows were super smooth on the eyes. You get a super shock in here that's really great. So I don't necessarily know if this is like a must-have for you if you are someone who does have a lot of warm-toned palettes with pops of blue, but I do think it was one of their best launches this year. I also wanted to mention the ColourPop Clay It Cool palette. I think this was meant to be, I don't know if it was like a dupe or it was inspired by the Patrick Ta palettes, because you do get a row of shimmers, a row of mattes, and then two creams. They also did like a cooler toned version of this, which Patrick Ta doesn't have anything like that. So if you do like cooler toned eyeshadows, that might be more ideal. But I just really like this color story. I tend to prefer like warmer or rosy toned neutrals, and I think this palette performs really nicely. Again, one of their better palettes in terms of quality. The matte shadows are very rich. The shimmer shadows are really intense on the eyes, and I just like using it. It does come with two creams, which I don't think ColourPop had done in the past, and I don't tend to reach for these a ton because, again, like I mentioned with the Huda Beauty palette, they're fine, but they're not necessarily my preferred formula. So again, I wish this had like one more metallic and one more matte, but I feel like if you are someone who likes to have creams in your palette, then you might enjoy these. I'm not planning on buying a ton of palettes in 2023, but if I was, I probably would pick up the cooler toned version of this just because I do love like the layout, the concept, and the quality a lot. Okay, before I jump into my top three, I just have one more palette to mention in today's video. This is from Milani. I think this was the very first palette I tried in 2022. It is the Gilded Flora palette. So I'm not going to say this is the highest quality palette I've ever tried, but I find myself going back to it over and over because it is such a gorgeous color story. I also think there are people who would really enjoy this formula. Again, kind of similar to the LA Girl formula. If you're someone who prefers like a very soft eyeshadow that you can gradually build up, then this is the formula for you. The matte shadows are definitely powdery, but they're very easy to blend on the eyes. You get a very soft wash of color. You can build them up to some extent, especially if you go in with like these darker shades right here, but overall I feel like you just get like a light soft wash of color. The metallic shadows in here are the standouts. They're very intense, really vibrant, but again, they're really lightweight, so I feel like they're just very easy to work with. And that is my experience with Milani shadows in general. You're not going to get like a super rich, smooth shadow on the eyes with a ton of pigmentation. You're going to get something a little bit lighter and softer and more natural, but I feel like there is a time and place for it. So I wanted to share this one with you in today's video. I think it's just such a pretty color story, and I still reach for it when I want like a pinky purple toned look. Okay, it's time to share my top 3 palettes of 2022. If you've watched my videos this year, then I don't think these will be any surprise to you. But I loved all 3 of these palettes so much, and I've used them over and over, and I think they are the standout palettes in terms of color story, quality, packaging, everything. They're so good, and I just love them. So the first one is from Tarte. I never thought I would have a Tarte palette in my top 3 palettes of the year, but here we are. I've just never been a big Tarte eyeshadow fan, but this palette has me changing my mind. This is the Tarte Maneater After Dark palette, and I love it. I think it is such a fun, stunning palette. This one came out during the fall season, and I felt like it was just the perfect time because when I used this palette, I was able to create so many different fun fall looks. I could do something really gold themed. I could do something with this green. There are so many gorgeous berries in here. I love like these pinky purple shadows. I could also do something really rich and warm toned, and I don't know, I just had, again, a lot of fun using this palette. I felt like every time I used it, my look turned out really, really nicely, and it was just very easy to put together different color combinations. Even though it is a little bit of a larger palette, it wasn't overwhelming to me by any means. I feel like it just flows really nicely, and they did such a good job choosing like both matte and shimmer shadows in here that go so well together. So I feel like it's a very easy palette to work with. The shadows are really very blendable, super smooth. I didn't have any issues with it. I liked that there were so many different textures in here, so you obviously get your matte shadows. You get kind of like these lighter, softer metallics, and then you get these like almost thicker, like very smooth, rich, intense shadows as well. So I love it. Even though it is a little bit of a larger palette, it's very, very thin, so it doesn't feel overly big. And I just enjoy it so much. It's definitely one of my top palettes of the year. Number 2 for me is the Natasha Denona Retro Glam palette. I love this palette so much. I know there are so many people who didn't like it, didn't like the quality, didn't like the color story, but that is just not the case for me. I absolutely love it. I feel like it's just such a fun palette to use. In fact, I've worn this so much since getting it that like every time I wear it, you guys are like, wow, you're really enjoying that palette, or wow, you really wear that palette a lot, you must love it. And I do. I just think you can create so many different looks using it. I am wearing it on my eyes today, just this palette. And I did do a video on this look when I did like the review and 2 different looks. They're very similar to what I'm wearing. So if you want to check it out, I'll link it below. But I'm basically wearing a lot of shadows. I'm wearing this one, this one, this one, and this one in the crease and as like transition colors. And then I have these 3 all over the lid. Like this one mainly in the front and the center, this one mainly in the outer corner, and then this one all over. But I've also done like completely neutral looks, very green looks, a completely pink look, and I just love it. I feel like you can do so much with this palette. It kind of pushed me to get back into colorful eyeshadow, and I think the quality is really, really good. Now, it is a little bit of a softer palette, and when I did my initial review, I said that I wish this one was like a true, intense, deep, rich green, and then I wished one of these were a matte shadow as well, just so you could create more depth. Overall, when I use this palette, I do get more of like a lighter, softer look or more of a mid-toned look, kind of like what I have on today, but not necessarily anything super dark and smoky. I mean, you could go a little bit deeper if you use this shade, but I do feel like it's missing just like those 2 deep, rich matte shadows, and that for me would have made it perfect. But I don't necessarily go that dramatic these days, so I do feel like it is kind of like a nice everyday palette when I want something a little bit more interesting than like a very simple look, but I don't want anything too over the top and dramatic. So I love it. I think this is one of her best palettes in terms of quality. Like I think the shadows perform really flawlessly. I think it just comes down to whether or not you'll like the color story. And I feel like when you see it, you know whether or not you like the color story. Like it either speaks to you or you hate it. And I totally get that it's not for everyone, but I've enjoyed it so, so much. Okay, so that brings us to number 1, which I just don't think is going to be any surprise if you've watched my videos this year. It is the Patrick Ta Major Dimension 2. When I picked this up back in the spring, I just knew it was going to be one of my top palettes of the year, and that was early on. Like that was back in April. But I fell in love with it instantly, and every single time I use this palette, I love how my look comes together. It's just very easy to use, it's really effortless, it's fun, and these are my kind of colors. I do wear a lot of very pink toned looks, purple toned looks, rosy neutrals, so I feel like this color story is just meant for me. I love the Major Dimension 1, but I think the quality of this one is a lot better. The matte shadows are very rich and intense, very creamy, super easy to work with. It feels like they put extra effort into these compared to the first one. And the shimmer shadows, again, are just better than the shadows in the first one. You can layer them up to look really intense on the eyes. You can just take like a light layer for like a sheer wash of sparkle, or you can layer them on top of these cream shadows for a really rich, vibrant look too. Again, there are 2 cream shadows in here, not necessarily my preferred formula, but I do feel like I get a lot of use out of these, and they work well with the shimmers in here. So I absolutely love it. I think some people look at it and they don't necessarily love like the rosiness or the orange tones in here, but I feel like that's why I do love it so much, because I'm such a fan of these shades. I am curious to see what they have in store for 2023, because they did say on Instagram that they might be working on a Major Dimension 3. So I don't know if they're going to go like the super cool toned route, or I'm trying to think what else they would do. I mean, I feel like that's only natural, because the first one is more of like a warm toned neutral. This one is very warm, but it's very pink toned. So I feel like a cooler toned palette is probably next. But I also feel like a lot of Patrick Ta's makeup style is very like warm toned, very pinky, very red. So I don't know, maybe they'll do something kind of like purpley. So that's everything I wanted to share with you in today's video. Thank you guys so much for watching. I would love to know, what was your favorite eyeshadow palette launch of 2022? Or if you focused on older palettes, what was your go-to palette? Let me know in the comments below. I will be back in about a week with some new videos, but I hope you enjoy the rest of your holiday season, and I'll see you guys very soon with a new one. Bye.